Hey bio team. So there's a couple of ways that our body can use glucose to recharge ADP back into ATP. The main strategy that our bodies use is called aerobic respiration, and this occurs over several steps. The first step is called the glycolysis, which literally means the breaking of this sugar molecule. And in glycolysis, the glucose molecule is just split in half into two separate pyruvate molecules. It was a 6-carbon sugar, now it's two separate 3-carbon molecules. And this process does two things. First, it recharges 2 ATP. And second, it actually frees up electrons, which will get used in the last step of this process. And you can see there's these two molecules, NAD and FAD, where the electrons will be stored until they're ready for use in the final step. But after glucose gets split apart in glycolysis, the next step occurs during the Krebs cycle, in which these two pyruvate molecules enter into the mitochondria, so they pass through the outer membrane and the inner membrane of the mitochondria, into what's called the mitochondria matrix, which is just the inside of the mitochondria. And once inside, they're broken apart into carbon dioxide molecules. And this process also recharges 2 ATP and also frees up electrons for use in the last step. Last, these electrons are used to power an electron transport chain. The oxygen that we breathe in will attract these electrons through a chain of transport proteins called proton pumps, which get their name from their ability to pump these hydrogen ions through them in one direction. And so what you can see is that this electron is actually powering each of these proton pumps. As it passes through the proton pump, it gives it the energy needed to pull the hydrogen through. Now the thing is, once there's this really high concentration of hydrogen in this space between the two membranes, the hydrogen is trapped. It doesn't have the ability to flow back and diffuse back the way it came. These pumps work in one direction. And so the only place for the hydrogen to go at this point is through a special transport protein called Atp Synthase. And in the process of diffusing through this protein, the hydrogen actually powers the recharging of ATP. So a single molecule of glucose will generate enough electrons, which will pump enough protons to recharge 32 ATP at a time. And in the process, the electrons, as they attract to the oxygen, will bond with hydrogen to form water molecules. So that's aerobic respiration. You can see in total, 36 ATP get recharged from a single molecule of glucose. Now anaerobic respiration, which occurs without oxygen, is a much simpler process and only recharges 2 ATP per glucose. If there's no oxygen around, the molecule of glucose will still undergo glycolysis, in which glucose gets split into two separate pyruvate molecules. And 2 ATP is still recharged, but now there's no oxygen to receive the electrons freed by this process. So as a result, organisms will process these loose electrons in one of two ways. They'll either do lactic acid fermentation, which is what our bodies do when they convert pyruvate into lactate, or they can convert the pyruvate into ethanol during alcoholic fermentation. And that's it. At this point, you guys have some practice. We'll see you next class.